Good evening, everyone, and welcome to SocialFlight Live. We have a great program for you this evening. AOPA President Mark Baker is here with us. It's going to be so fascinating to hear from Mark, really fascinating. Before we get started, just a few things and updates from us here at the show. I just wanted to go through and give you an update on some things going on to help inspire and support general aviation. Let's turn this back on there. What I'd like to do here, let me share my screen. There we go. And you know, we started SocialFlight Live to support general aviation during the crisis, and we've done a number of things during this in order to kind of go and get started with it. One of the things that we've done is we have our program, of course, with flying coming back here. That is aviation social distancing, one propeller apart and one community together. Many organizations, airports, and local clubs have asked us for a copy of this with their own logo. And so if you send that, it's just a request. You can see the information right here at info@socialflight.com. Just send a request here. We're happy to add your logo to this, send it back to you, and you can use it in any way that you see fit. Another part of what we've been doing here, of course, is takeoffs for takeout. We want to save our airport restaurants to do everything possible to support local aviation businesses during this time. And so send us your stories, send us your pictures, we'll feature them. We've got lots and lots of cool things going on here to help do it. And we also share, of course, our own stories as part of that. And so one of the stories I would like to share here is a personal one. Ben Simon, my youngest son now, soloed last Friday, July 31st. Very proud of him. And to see positive things like this, exciting milestones in everyone's aviation career happening, even despite the pandemic and the crisis and so much bad news that happens around us, is really inspiring. And I'd love to hear more stories as well from everyone else around having to do with that. In addition, I'd like to share a trip that we did, because we always want to show you some cool places to go to get out there and fly. We took our family on this wonderful trip that is to Bowling Green, Kentucky, coming all the way up from Boston down here for this. It was great because there are two very cool things you can do down there. There's probably many, many more, but what we chose to do, we landed there in Bowling Green. We went to the Corvette Museum and we went houseboating on Lake Cumberland, which is a gorgeous, enormous houseboating community and lake and a state park. And what's wonderful about this is something that is perfect for general aviation. Our world right now makes commercial air travel challenging for a lot of people. People are concerned about some of the risks associated with it. Here in our general aviation community, we have the ability to continue to travel, to show people that they can do things within their socially distanced personal circles and still travel, still do the things that make us the community that we are. And so I just wanted to share a few of those pictures and wonderful experiences. Feel free to write me if you want information about how to go do a trip like this for yourself. It is not very expensive, and it is truly a once-in-a-lifetime memory that you can make with basic general aviation flying. At this point, I'd like to introduce Mark Baker. With 40 years and more than 10,000 flight hours in his logbook, Mark Baker truly understands the general aviation community that he serves at the helm of the Aircraft Owner and Pilots Association. Mark's a commercial pilot with single and multi-engine land and seaplane ratings, a rotorcraft rating, type ratings in Cessna Citation 500, 525s, even the DC-3. He's worked his way through numerous airplanes, including a Cessna 177 Cardinal, various V-tail Bonanzas, Barons, a Model 36 like we fly here at SocialFlight, and many more, all for business, pleasure, all around the gambit of what general aviation does for our world. He's even flown everything from business jets to helicopters and historic aircraft like the Ford Trimotor. My personal favorite, I will say, is always seeing him arrive in a seaplane at the EAA Air Venture event at AOPA's special event that they have there. And so I am grateful to welcome Mark on SocialFlight Live to share his story and insights into the work that AOPA is doing and how general aviation is faring during the pandemic and beyond. Welcome, Mark. How are you?
Great, Jeff. And again, thanks for what you do, keeping the community alive, and excited about general aviation. There's lots of good things going on, and I look forward to spending the evening with you and talking about things that are all good and all good things in aviation.
Yeah, and again, I am so grateful for the work that you and AOPA do to make all this possible, because it is so hard, it seems, when crisis happens like this for our world to be stifled. We have a very fragile community, so tell me a little bit about what's been happening at AOPA.
Well, it has been a busy period, since the recognition of this pandemic coming out in sometime in March. Through now, there's been some challenges at some local airports and local health ordinances, seemingly trying to affect and shut down airports or, FAA mandated airports. It was really a small number, kind of less than 10, but to date, all of those airports are opened. But there's been also an effect in the flight training world. What are the right protocols to use for flight training, particularly if it's people unknown to you outside your family and things like that. So we've worked hard to put up kinds of information on our website that helps people identify what they need to do and be careful and cleaning and all those kind of things, and the social distancing of more than 6 feet away from one another in an airplane is impossible, as we all know, unless you are flying a 747. So for general aviation, it has created some challenges, but I'm here to say that I have never seen more activity in and around these general aviation airports with people taking lessons, buying aircraft, just out getting current, staying current, enjoying because maybe they're home or maybe they're decided they're going to go see a relative by a general aviation airplane, or really being serious about buying it. And we've seen tremendous growth and activity around that. Even flying clubs are growing right now. So general aviation could be one of the things that comes out ahead. And a very sad time for a lot of our airline brethren and other people that are involved in some other parts of professional aviation, very challenged. But private aviation is here and is doing very well.
That's such great news. I mean, early on, it seemed like there was really a lot of stress during some of that lockdown period, and people not knowing where things were going to go. And it seemed a concern about, should we be flying at that point? Even though people might be flying completely alone or only in there with family members, there was this kind of guilt almost about doing it. And do you think we're past that completely?
Yeah, I think we have. I think much like whether it's the RV industry or the boating industry, in its purest form of recreation and its form of transportation, aviation is seen, general aviation, no different than getting in your car or your motorhome, as long as, again, you do it responsibly and respect other people's distances. I think you can travel and still get around this country or just go up for a ride. I think the early days in March and April, there's just a lot of unknown about what was going to happen next. And I think at this point in time, we've gotten further away from what that means in a total shutdown and being a responsible way to move around the country or around just staying current or going for a ride, much like people are doing in other forms of transportation.
Right. And of course, it's so important because that fabric, more than any huge business adventure or anything like that, it seems like our activity, like literally what everyone watching tonight is doing, is are you flying, are you not flying, literally becomes the life or death of FBOs and flight schools and avionics companies and engine companies. Like everything relies so closely on whether or not pilots are actually participating.
Well, in the local area where I'm in now in the Midwest, the FBOs that I've been talking to have been seeing 60% growth in avgas sales over year in the month of May, June, and July. So these are local Wisconsin, Minnesota, even out in the Dakotas. I mean, kinds of activity localized to these areas, maybe, but again, anecdotal. We don't have full and complete picture of the usage up. But every flight school that I talk to has seen a different kind of student coming in, either upgrading a rating or finishing up with a rating, more of an attitude about general aviation than maybe professional career in flying. So we have lots of connectivity in this great thing in the 5,000 public use airports in this country. And for the most part, we're seeing the light turbine down to the Cessna 120, 140 world very active.
Wow. Now, so you mentioned ratings and stuff. So before we lose track of this, I'd like to go back in time, and tell me about your story in aviation, because it's fascinating. I mean, that list that I rattled off of aircraft that you have flown in your past, and also the things that you're even doing now, just puts a huge smile on my face. So what's your story about getting involved in aviation?
Well, it's certainly an addiction. I've never had enough money for drugs because of my addiction to aviation. But, it started early on, like a lot of folks. My grandfather went to school in an early stage with this young guy named Charlie Lindbergh. So he considered himself a follower of the Charlie Lindbergh story, as we all know, crossing with the Spirit of St. Louis. And my father worked his way through high school at North Central Airlines cleaning DC-3s. But neither of them had the ability at that point in time to pursue aviation, although they used to take me out to the penny a pound rides. And I did take my ground school in high school, so it's one of the reasons I have such a strong advocacy for trying to create education in aviation in high school. And it changed the trajectory of my life, I really believe, by having that interest in sitting later on at the University of Minnesota Flight School and looking outside at a brand new Baron in the middle 70s thing. I don't think I'll ever afford it, but one of these days, well, I've owned, I think, 13 different Barons now since then. I'm not sure which drove which. The need to fly or, and feed that addiction drove my business career. But I think they were very correlated in terms of I was driven to succeed in business and modestly so, interesting retail career. But I used aviation for part of that career. I used it to commute to families or meetings and other things. And I was always able to get to places that a lot of people weren't able to get to A, B, and C in the same day, and I certainly was able to do that. What was fun later in life is my very first airplane was a Cessna 150 while I was going to the University of Minnesota, and I gave my grandfather his very first plane ride. He had never ridden a plane ride.
Wow.
And then a few years later, I bought another Cessna 150 and a Sierra. My dad got his license. My father got his license with one of our old airplanes, and then later on, I got his full plane rating in my Super Cub. So
you were able to make your father's aviation dreams basically come true from your own aviation experience, and letting him do that on your aircraft. That must be a memory and a feeling that you just can never lose.
It was very satisfying, and he still flies with me today. He ended up owning a couple airplanes, a Stinson 108, a 172 later on, and he's still 86 years old, or soon to be, and still loves and enjoys flying, but stays with me mostly in the airplane. But we got my brother here, my sister-in-law, two of my son-in-laws. My son is just soloed, so I'm trying to spread the addiction.
You're doing a very good job of it. So now you keep listing all these different planes, and it's fascinating because obviously some people are deeply involved in general aviation and they've had the same plane for 25 years. What is it that that drives you to just rifle through all these different planes and keep collecting both planes in sequence, and then also just continuing to trade one for another to keep your experience going?
Yeah, I've only kept one airplane for a really long time, my Super Cub, which I've had a few other Super Cubs, but I bought my Super Cub from the original owner. It's a 1953, over 25 years ago. I bought that airplane and had 300 or 400 total time when I bought it. It's got over 200 hours on that airplane. I've had that to the top of the Hudson Bay, to the bottom of Mexico, all over the backcountry, and then down to the Keys and up to the East Coast. So wow. that one airplane, and then behind me is my Cessna 185, which I've had a number of them as well. This particular one I'm also the second owner on. I bought it with 700 hours on it. Now I think it's got 1,250 hours on it, but I redid the panel, paint, interior, and those two airplanes are part of the staple. I'm no longer taking offers and never saw them. The other airplanes that I've enjoyed, though, I've owned over 100 different aircraft personally.
Wait a minute. Say that again slowly for everybody. You've owned over 100 aircraft personally?
Yep.
Oh my God, that's amazing and wonderful.
It's stupid.
No, it's not.
It's some models. Like I've owned 13 different Barons. One, and that's not counting the one Baron I owned 3 times. I sold to a friend, bought it back. Sold to another friend, bought it back. And one Baron, 2 of the other Barons I owned twice over that period of time. I've always kept one of those around. Had a bunch of T6s, and round motors have kind of been one of those affinities that I've had and had the opportunity to fly my friend Greg Herrick's tri-motors, the Stinsons and the Fords over the years. But the sound of a round motor, and had the unique opportunity to have had T6s, like I say, Beech 18 on floats, a Beaver, a Waco, a Howard DGA.
Oh my God.
And so part of the thing I enjoy about it is finding an interesting airplane that may need a little bit of TLC, taking the project on and finding ways to get that accomplished, flying it, learn how to fly it, safely and wisely, and then look for something else that intrigues me that I haven't flown. And the list is getting smaller, but there's still quite a few out there yet.
So one of the things I'm hearing, which is really cool, is that it's certainly not that there's anything about the planes that you own that causes you to move on. It's that there's this next challenge or next adventure of an aircraft that kind of comes up that you seem to be like, that looks interesting.
Yeah, I'd like to learn how to fly that. I'd like to touch it and feel it and be part of that. And I think all of us have to think about whether it's a Cessna 120 or a Mooney or whatever airplane you're flying today as stewards for those aircraft. There's a couple 100,000 aircraft in this country today. And we're building about 1,000 a year, and unfortunately we're wrecking about 1,000 or losing about 1,000 a year. So we're not really gaining on this inventory. We have all the responsibility, if we're lucky enough to own this stuff, is to take care of them and hopefully make them better for the next person to buy and share, or put them in a club where more people can touch them. But it's one of the things I really believe in is getting these airplanes out the door, out of the hangar, and have them do what they do best, which is make a little bit of noise, take somebody for a ride, and look down at this beautiful earth.
It's a fascinating perspective, and I really do agree with it, because people think of something like a home as being so personal and having all these memories attached to it, and having it mean so much, and it's basically permanent as real estate. I think it seems like airplanes are the same thing, and that isn't true of a lot of things. A lot of things become disposable out there, and not really classics. But airplanes really are. They can be around forever, and I love that you called it being a steward of that, because someday someone else, maybe it's in your own family, but it's going to move on. The plane outlives most people.
That's right. Yeah, these aircraft, and I've had the great opportunity to fly lots of airplanes in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and we used to talk about a new 185 and an old 185. Well, the whole span of the lifetime of 185 is like 20 years, and the newest one is a 1985, is 35 years old. So we're dealing largely with an inventory of classics. And they all are so much fun to fly. When people ask me, what airplane wouldn't you buy? I can't come up with hardly any. No, I like them all.
Now, if you had to go, if you looked back and you could just jump into one time period or another, would you, given that the planes are still around now, would you rather be now with all the modern things or whatever we have, or was there a kind of a period of planes that's close to your heart, that you're not looking for the latest avionics or something?
Well, my favorite kind of flying is both backcountry and water flying, because the skills that you have to employ about where you're going to land, how you're going to land, what are the conditions, are not controlled by a control tower or a piece of pavement. So you sharpen your skill sets, and certainly flying around the old Beech 18 I had, and being an outfitter, bringing people to a camp would have been something that's, to me, quite romantic. To be able to do that and put your skills to work. But I also say right now, today, 185 I have here, it's actually got a really nice panel. It's got a really good autopilot. It's got a really powerful engine, and I don't want to go backwards. Yeah, so even my Super Cub's got a nice GPS in it, and something to be said about the modern equipment that we have today. That I'm really glad we have it, and a lot of things that AOPA did to make sure that we have access to non-TSO STC stuff so we can upgrade our older airplanes at lower costs.
Yep.
And we've got a very competitive community of avionics people that are helping us have better situational awareness at lower costs and lighter and all that kind of thing. So I think there's always a pang to say, geez, I wish I could have won. I'm really happy where I'm at right now.
That makes sense, definitely. Besides, it's easy to forget how challenging it was when you didn't know where you were just by looking at a map, and it wasn't long ago when that was the case.
No, I remember coming across Canada, one of my other Super Cubs on straight floats with a map and lap, as I used to call it, and then of course the wind chill leaked, and all of a sudden you have mush in your lap, trying to figure out where you're at. You know, it wasn't that much fun, really. No.
So you mentioned seaplanes, and obviously that I mentioned earlier. That's when I've seen you most of the time, is getting out of a seaplane one way or another. When we've met and talked, when did that begin? When did you get the bug for that?
Well, I've always had an appreciation for it, but my Super Cub actually was my first deal at them. A friend of my father's had bought this airplane new in '53, and he stopped flying it in 1970 something, and it had trees growing up inside. He had a private hangar on the lake in the Twin Cities here, and he interviewed me, is a better way to say it, to buy his baby, and I bought. It had 35 horsepower with straight floats on it at that time, and I bought that airplane, and then I got Brian Skanke, who was Seaplanes Adventures, taught me how to fly. I was his first student on floats, kind of 28 years ago or something like that. And then I started hanging, using the float plane on straight floats and keeping it, and going to Canada and going to places, and I just really started to enjoy that. And then I went from that to 180s, 185s, 206s, Beavers, Caravans on floats, Beach 18 on floats, and as I mentioned to you earlier, right now, and I did my water multi-engine widgeon. I've flown a Goose. I'm now getting my type rating in an Albatross. So I think I'm going to max out on my flying experiences here. But I just enjoy that freedom, and it's a very unique freedom in this country to be able to land in so many bodies of water. And as you probably well recall, early on in the Glenn Curtis days, that was their runways, was water, because they didn't have pavement. Of course, they didn't have very many grass strips at that point in time. So water is a big part of the history of flying, how people were planning to move around the world.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense, actually. So now you have all that background. What brought you to AOPA?
Well, having worked for a number of home improvement industry companies, and in my career, started off in Knox, somewhere in the Twin Cities, and then we sold that part of Palos Cashways, went to Scotty's in Florida. My first time meeting the founders of Home Depot, and they offered me a job right away at that point. I turned them down, moved to California for another company, Home Base, Home Club, and at that point in time, the founders of Home Depot made me an offer I couldn't refuse. You're going to become the president of the Midwest division of the Home Depot, which there were no stores. So I opened up the whole group from out of Chicago, and became ultimately the chief operating officer, chief merchant for Home Depot in the late '90s, early 2000s. So it was a pretty good career, and afforded me the opportunity, to commute with my own airplanes, and from a P-Baron to 340s to King Airs to, I guess, about my first Citation 500 back in the middle '90s. Got my single pilot type rating. And then I, did some work with Scott Smirnoka on the board, and was the president of that company, and did Gander Mountain, started it up, grew it up, took it public, sold my piece of it. Recently did a turnaround at Orchard Supply on the West Coast, sold that to Lowe's, and got this call 7.5 years ago. How'd you like to run a nonprofit? From a recruiter. I said, on purpose, you crazy? And he said, well, it's an aviation. So, well, if it's AOPA, because I knew they were starting the search, I said, I dropped my luggage, I'm on my way. And shortly thereafter met the board, and the board said if I was interested, it was mine to choose. And I really decided at that point in time to take a kind of what I call a back nine of life approach. I'll do what I really want to do, and not do another retail turnaround or retail startup. I took this on 7 years ago, actually this week,
Wow.
7th anniversary, come to think of it, at Oshkosh. And so it's been really fun. I've enjoyed the community, invested reasonable time, but gotten great satisfaction on the things that we've been able to accomplish as a community together over the last 7 years. Basic med, making sure we get CBP back in the right place with not doing no suspicion stops, stuff like that we've been able to rise to the top and have very good meetings, and have a great staff and really great people at AOPA. I think accomplishing and supporting the general aviation community, and I have just enjoyed every day of the last 7 years.
Wow. And so let's talk about some of those things, because they've been pretty big accomplishments, and there's still a lot going on to talk about. I mean, one of the biggest ones, obviously, that you mentioned first is Basic Med. So we're in what, year 3 now of Basic Med?
That's right. Yep, it has been a very rewarding transition to get that accomplished for airmen. 58,000 folks flying under Basic Med right now. Probably one of the largest active groups, probably a third of maybe the really highly active pilots, something like that. It was clear to me that the community was frustrated that since the 70s there's been some talk about some kind of third class alternative or third class this or that, and there was nothing going on. And I had met with Michael Ward, who was the FAA administrator, a number of times, and they were frustrated they were not able to get it internally moved, and even what they were considering was much smaller than what ultimately got accomplished through the law change. It might have been a one passenger day VFR, kind of 180 horsepower.
Right.
And we worked hard, pulled the community together, worked with the EA and all the other stakeholders. Jim Kuhn, who leads our group in DC, has been elected, a staffer in the House for a long time on the transportation. Was able to write a pretty coherent, up to 250 knots, up to 18,000 feet, up to 5 passengers, day VFR, IFR, the whole program. And frankly, it ran through. It was a lot of work. We had some, I wouldn't say it was straight line, but less than 1% of all legislation ever turns into a law. We got a law signed by Obama, and I would give the FAA tremendous credit. They actually got it done ahead of time in May of that following year. And to date, it's been a wonderful program for a lot of people. And we can't see any adverse issue with safety. And so we continue to support it. We have it now for Mexico and the Bahamas. Unfortunately, we were working really hard to try and get it done in Canada, either through a bilateral type agreement or through ICAO action, the National Civil Aviation Authority. And while we're on the docket, by the way, on their docket, they run in a 5 and 7 year cycle. We're actually 4 years ahead of cycle to get it on the ICAO docket. And it's still in process. I'm still hopeful we'll get something done with Canada at some point in time, but it's a little mute this year because you can't go to Canada anyway, right. at least till September, and I doubt soon thereafter. It's not likely to be very open either.
But it's always good if you can use your downtime productively and open the doors so that
Correct.
when it opens, we can do that. And I'd be remiss if I did not pass along that my Q&A line is lighting up with the word Canada right now from a bunch of people. So I can see that your efforts to work with NAV Canada or the Canadian FAA on that side, their version of it, CAA on that, to get this passed is definitely supported by our audience.
I know, and I feel for it personally. I have a lot of friends that have cabins in Canada and float planes, and it's a very friendly country to travel to, and they have always welcome U.S. pilots. So we've just got to get this done, and I can't commit to you that absolutely be done in 12 months, but I can commit to you that we are going to work on it really hard until it gets done, because I believe it's attainable.
That's great. Now, one of the other kind of questions that came in, we talked about different things that have happened recently or over the past 10 years, we think recently in our terms, is LSA also. Now, what about like Mosaic and all the work going on to try to update some of that work, world?
Yeah, there was a year and a half ago, I guess already, almost 2 years now. Really strong movement within the FAA and the Small Airplane Directorate to update. Why did we come up with this silly rule of what's an LSA? We want to make the safest airplane. We want to make an airplane that's structurally better. Why should weight be the limit? Maybe it doesn't only allow one passenger, maybe different kinds of interpretations. And I can't go into detail with that because it's still under rulemaking, if you will. But there is movement that I think we're all going to be directionally pleased with. Unfortunately, the derailment of the 737 MAX and FAA and what's going on inside their legal department and now the pandemic has kind of derailed the energy that was happening that I think many of us in the community really support, pretty excited about. And I think we will see it. I just don't know, again, if it's going to be 6 months or 12 months, but we'll start to see something.
Do you feel that that whole experience of the MAX and all the things that went with it of issues with regulation and oversight and everything else, do you feel that general aviation is either now or is going to be paying the price for that?
Well, clearly we work very close with Pete Bunce over at Gamma because the general aviation manufacturer is very concerned about the loss of delegated authority or the oversight when you're trying to get new, faster, better things installed in airplanes at better, hopefully better prices. But certainly enhancements at innovation, and the FAA could not hire enough people to be responsive in the real time. And good examples today are, the auto land system that you've seen approved by Piper and headed for TBM and shortly thereafter probably Cirrus and others. I think is a point where that's a big step to have FAA sign off on that, and they have doing really good things around that. I think they continue to try and help work with us as we look at propulsion systems, whether they be pure electric or hybrid systems, but they've got to update, move faster to try and get that stuff done that is better for everybody. And so I think there has been over the last year a loss of a little momentum, but I'm starting to feel like it's coming back, that we're able to get products and processes improved to get things done for general aviation. But as you can imagine, within the FAA, there's a lot of people who don't want to be accused of not managing the process.
Right. Yeah, it did seem like we've had this renaissance of whether it be a NORSI that allowed for non-safety related, the safety related non-critical equipment that allowed people to install so many new products,
Right.
about being able to get non-certified avionics into the panel, a lot of it obviously being around avionics. It did seem like there was a lot of momentum and freedom starting to happen to get towards safety and toward affordability, and hopefully that doesn't get derailed by people just getting back to kind of the FAA Gold Watch thing of, if I say yes, I risk my gold watch of retirement, but if I say no, I'm fine.
Yeah, I'm a little bit willing to support what the FAA has been doing for the general aviation side. I can't speak to the airliner construct and what they're going to end up putting in place there, but I think there's a lot of support within the leadership on this part of the FAA to recognize, there needs to be different ways we can put a 1965 Comanche and update it, and the manufacturers, whether they be Garmin or Avidyne or others, are now excited, and True Track and all these autopilots that are coming along, Dynon, at magnificent prices and great product, and they're getting stuff approved. I think probably not quite as fast as I'd like to, but we're getting it done.
Now, one of the other areas I know that you've been working recently, obviously we've seen even before the pandemic hit, a real challenge around the insurance industry, and that's affecting a lot of folks.
Oh boy,
with rapidly rising insurance rates, to not being able to get insurance for some people at certain ages or things like that. That seemed to be pretty different world than was happening even 2 years or a year before. What are you finding on that? And I know you're working on that.
Oh boy, I work on it every day, every week, and so do a lot of our leadership at AOPA, because we want to make sure that we don't wind up with impossible insurance situations. Now, I will say, and not in defense of the insurance industry, but the facts are. The facts are it's a very small pool. There have been big losses, i.e. Boeing and others that are part of our pool in aviation. We're not expecting a GA to pick up Boeing's losses, but and a couple of those airline losses. But we have a safe issue that we can continue to play back. We've half the fatal accidents in GA that we had 20 years ago, half the rate. We continue to put out more safety information through AOPA and our Safety Institute to try and get people to understand how they can become more safe. So from a safety and a fatal accident, we don't have an argument. I mean, we've been moving in the right direction. We'll continue to move in the right direction. What there have been is, a number of discussions about premiums and prices have gone up. There's no question about it. Recognizing that if you would have bet 20 years ago, as I recall, when you got your first turbine or your first high performance airplane, you paid more than you did 10 years ago. It went down because it went from, probably a dozen or so underwriters to somewhere in excess of 20 for a while. So there's a lot of competition for the last dozen years. 2 years ago, kind of reversed. they weren't making any money. There's a supply and demand and profitability kind of ratios. And so a number of the underwriters exited because they couldn't make any money in this category. And they were giving away, in my opinion, very high limits of liability. And then when they got stung a few times on some tragic accidents, they didn't like that. And that's where they were trying to put some value in the equation. So now we're having this opposite and equal reaction that's pretty extraordinary on the pricing on certain parts of this. But we sent out a number of communications through Tom Haynes' group, but work with your broker, talk to him or her about what you're doing for your safety. Don't wait for them to tell you what to do. Be proactive on your safety. We do not recommend changing underwriters for a couple $100. It's not a good idea right now, because staying with them so that when you do turn 70 or 75 and asking somebody to take on a net new risk with maybe 5 or 10 years of your flying career left, it's a little harder for them to kind of get excited about that versus somebody you've been with for a number of years. Right. So we've been advising that, and yet we are still trying to figure out this age thing that some, not all, just a number of underwriters have decided that we don't agree with them, by the way, at all. At age 75, you need to fly with another pilot, and we just refute that, and we don't think there's evidence to support that. I just think it's them tightening down on their portfolio, and actually asking for some of these people to go shop. And it's hard for people to go shop at 75 years old for a complex airplane. So, but there are markets, and we continue to work with recommendations of what markets you can access good insurance at those levels. But some of the things that we don't know, we have a very good visibility about what happens on a fatal or significant accident. We don't know how many people have left the tow bar on and tried to start the engine, or bumped into the hangar, or frankly, we don't even know about the gear ups many occasions. Those are significant claims. So we want to work with the industry and the insured to say, how do we help reduce claims that can make us a better investment for the insurance company? So it's a long pull. I wish we weren't there, but we're going to keep working it every day so people can get insurance. It may not be as cheap as it was 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah. Well, I think it would be helpful if at least the insurance company for themselves was hopefully a little bit more creative in terms of what they allowed of variations in what people even bought for products, because it seems like with auto insurance, with other types of insurance, deductibles really matter. Other things really matter. And it seems like the people I've interviewed and talked to having to do with the insurance industry, they basically say, yeah, that doesn't affect much for us. Like, we don't care whether it's no deductible or 1,000 deductible or 5,000 deductible, your rate's going to be the same almost.
There seemed to be more talk about that because, you're a Bonanza driver, and if somebody, if somehow kids went in without getting the gear down or collapses or whatever, that's a $100,000 event these days, or darn close. And maybe the deductible needs to be a little higher on that instance because of there's a pilot issue there potentially, and that's what they don't want to be in a position to argue. Was it collapse or was it a failure? So I understand a little of their part, but we do have to work with some of the matrix to figure out how to keep costs down and keep availability of insurance up.
Yeah, and again, I'm not against that at all. I think having options is good, and having an insurance company be able to say to someone like you just brought up, regardless of the reason, a gear up has a $10,000 deductible or a $20,000 deductible if you want this lower rate. At least there's options, and it gives people options, and hopefully it keeps that pool going, as you mentioned.
Well, the seaplane insurance, for instance, on amphib goes up. Your deductible goes up quite a bit when it's on amphibs and if there's a water accident, because the recovery is so much more expensive, or it could be potentially. So they're starting to move that way. I would say they're not as far as I wish they were, but we're working hard. Richard McSpadden in our safety group is working with them to say, is there some kind of more sharing we could do so that we can help work on those claims that we don't have real transparency. I'm not even sure much transparency there's among the underwriters, because they kind of hold their cards pretty close. If there were a way we could do that protects their privacy and share the claim, so we can start working on those issues to help lower the costs. We're interested.
Now, another area, of course, that's big that has to do with aviation is always around privacy, and I know AOPA has done a lot in that area. Obviously, one of the dramatic ones that comes up is when we start talking about ADSB. ADSB's been a huge boom for safety and information, weather, traffic in the cockpit, so many great things that it's brought to general aviation. It's also brought a lot of concerns about privacy. And we've actually talked about that on our program before with the FAA's programs and with the FAA on the program about ways that people can enroll in lab program for limiting aircraft display or PIA for private ICAO identifier information. And I know AOPA is doing a lot of work with the FAA. Right now, we are, according to the FAA at least, I think one of the only, if not the only country that publishes all this private information on pilots, who's registered, what their ratings are, medical, all this other stuff. What's AOPA doing right now to help the privacy side of things?
Yeah, the encryption part of your ADSB is something we and NBAA and worked and agreed with the Next Gen committee that has to be a priority, because for good and sufficient reasons, for your own personal security, for potentially business reasons where you don't want to reveal where you're making these certain trips to. And frankly, Scarlett, nobody's darn business. And same thing, we wouldn't expect people to be going down the highway and be tracked and trailed and disclosed. So we're working in that direction. Yet there are some positives. I mean, if they know the identity of your aircraft, so they can know what the wingspan is and all those other kind of things, and where you're headed and how fast you can get there. And ADSB is a wonderful. It really is a big plus for us from a weather in the cockpit and a traffic in the cockpit. And I know you've used it, and for my time in Florida, I can't believe how many airplanes I never saw. And so it's an important piece moving forward in a safe environment, and will be even more important as the unmanned part enters the airspace at higher levels, knowing where that traffic is. So we got to find a way to do both. We got to have this traffic in the cockpit, really ask people to install it, leave it on, unless you're flying formation or some other need where you need to have it turned off, because we want to see where people are at. We'll continue to work on figuring out how to keep this privacy thing right. And as I mentioned, the FAA has agreed that they can't be using this stuff for enforcement if they want us to be compliant with installs and getting down there. So every time we come across any issue where there's been some suggestion of enforcement, we jump on that pretty hard, because the FAA administrators on down have promised that would not be part of the protocol.
I think that, I want to clarify that for everyone, because I found that interesting and actually something I wasn't aware of, that part of the work that you did to establish the rules and be able to get this all through included not using ADSB for enforcement purposes. A lot of people don't realize that.
That's right. Yeah, when they were looking for the community to sign up and get behind the installs, and hey, the General Aviation community spent hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to install this stuff on their own. And AOPA supported that so that we could have a safer, better informed pilot in the cockpit. And the FAA deployed lots of antennas to make sure that system could happen. And we still got some work to do to make it effective in a lot of places. But part of that quid pro quo was to make sure that we weren't just setting ourselves up to be entrapped for whatever violation that somebody would perceive. So from Huerta and Dan Elwes, the acting administrator, they both have said it and meant it. It's not to be used for enforcement action. So occasionally we'll have some local FSDO or FAA person that may not be aware of that. We do an education on that. Now, doesn't mean you should be turning it on and off and doing some things that you're not supposed to be doing. It just means that people make honest mistakes and wind up in the wrong place, and this cannot be used as a gotcha.
Right, but I think that's really important. I mean, especially given the things like the legal services plan that AOPA offers, et cetera. It's pretty important for people to know if you're concerned about a violation, or if you've been contacted about something and it supposedly came from people looking at ADSB data, that they should probably contact you guys.
That's right. And then the legal services, I'm like a pitch real quick, because if you fly, you should be on that program. You can get lots of access to expert legal advice in the aviation community very quickly. And the basic rules are: get your NASA form filled out, give us a call before you talk to anybody else, and as long as you've been a member before you have any potential FAA kind of risk. We've done a remarkable job working with airmen to make sure that the right answer happens.
Yep. And I'll say, I mean, I'm a member of that, and I've gotten questions answered. I've gotten help from them in different areas, and they are fantastic. So I'm a strong supporter. Talk about being worth the money. I mean, that is
for $100 a year.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, my approach was if you had a gold level above that gold level, I'd send them for that.
Yes, they do. But the the busiest activity they have going on today is people buying purchase contracts for aircraft because they're really busy doing those today. Yeah.
Fantastic news. Before we leave the subject of privacy, though, one of the things that has also come in really has to do with privacy of the registry. Where does that come from? Like, what's the justification on the other side? Why do people believe that, as opposed to your driver's license, as opposed to your license plate on your car, that anyone should be able to look up anything on your airplane or on yourself as a pilot? Where's that come from, and what's AOPA? What's your position on that?
Well, it's interesting. From now we're starting to lose a lot of visibility to the airman part of this thing, because as you opt out, you can go in and opt out of sharing your information on the FAA, your license right now. Unfortunately, that's actually where we get most of our leads to where new pilots are to become members of AOPA. But yeah, about a third, maybe it's 25% now, of airmen have opted out of sharing their information. You can do that.
Okay, I didn't actually know that you could do that. So you can just contact the FAA. I'm already an AOPA member, so you're not going to lose me. But I can contact them, and then people can look up myself, my ratings, my medical, all that stuff.
Yep. And
that's good to know.
Yeah, the registration side on the aircraft, we've been trying to work with the registration group on, this 3-year thing. Let's move it out, and we'd really like to see that updated. And frankly, I think they could do it a lot different. I mean, for us to be able to register an airplane for $5, it's a great deal. It costs them way more than handle that. I think it's time for them to update that whole system. And part of what Sam Graves has been working on is push the date out. We purged, a lot of derelict airplanes off the list. 15 years ago, I think we showed almost 280,000 airplanes, something of that magnitude. And after the 3-year registration kind of ground through, really isn't an airplane anymore. It's an aluminum recycling material. That purge has happened, and I don't see any value in doing this 3 years. So there's a couple of things that the transportation group's working on, and our DC group are working on with the registration and completely updating it.
Certainly makes a lot of sense. And again, some of the concern there is that there are companies, I've talked to them, I've seen their data for some of the other presentations that we've done, that are marrying all of those databases together and attaching it to that ADSB data that you've seen and getting it from private networks. And so all of a sudden, as you mentioned earlier, when all of it is so public, there's an upside, right? People want to be able to look up sometimes and find out if someone's legal, find out if what the owner of an aircraft is, and there's a lot of positive things that can come of it. But there's also that risk that someone can literally say, hey, I want to know every time this person flies, I want my phone to go off with a notification when they take off, where they're going, where they land. And actually, there are services that do that right now, and that's obviously concerning.
Yeah, it is. But big data exists. If you have a cell phone in your pocket and you're at Disneyland, they know it.
Right.
So
I think the difference, to most people is that a lot of people are concerned about Big Brother is watching, and that all makes sense. I think what a lot of people now are realizing is it's not just Big Brother's watching; it's your neighbors watching, like anyone's watching.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I'd like to see that. What good does it do, and why are we doing it for whom? There's certainly ability to track, and with spider tracks and doing your own personal tracking for family or friends doing it. So there's ways we can accomplish, whether it's safety of flight or just awareness of arrival. But I don't like the idea that everybody can see that I'm flying today or not.
Yeah. Now, another area, of course, that there's a lot of work going on is the Air Safety Foundation. That's been huge. What's some of the latest things happening there?
Well, Richard and his team on the Air Safety Foundation have really been developing, and I hope you've seen some of the videos that are really, unfortunately, intense, but an emotional event, because we want people to think hard about what caused this accident. The video work that they're doing and the stuff that they've got online, I mean, it's amazing. Over 8 million views we'll have this year on our safety stuff, and it's free. It's free because the foundation is set up as a separate part of the nonprofit. It was raised by donor money to make sure that we don't have a cost of safety, because there's a cost of not being safe. So because of generous donors, we've always had that piece with AOPA, and as you know, the other part of the foundation now works on the whole You Can Fly piece, which is about how we grow the pilot population, how we grow the young people interested in aviation. But it has been really rewarding to see the whole industry. Like I said, half the fatal accidents rate since they started working on it 20 some years ago is because of the efforts of the foundation and industry to work together to try and create different outcomes.
That's excellent. I mean, I encourage everyone to go out there and of course see it. There's so many things that you've got going on there that are really so fantastic. What would you say now, coming back to where we are now in the crisis? It's obviously a very dynamic situation. We're looking at taking our next flying adventure coming up, and we have to comply with new regulations here in Massachusetts having to do with travel and testing and all the things that go around that. Where do you see general aviation going in the next few months, 6 months, a year, when it comes to the crisis and the work you're doing?
I think, we're going to see general aviation be accessed even more. I saw the notice from Wheels Up, one of the service groups that flies either, in a way that helps people move around, go to their family places or meet their other family, and their business is up significantly. And they operate everything from citations to King Airs. And it's nice to hear that what's going on is that they're starting to see that kind of activity. In GA, I think you're going to see huge growth for the next number of years because people that have the wherewithal are going to avoid going on the airlines. They're going to avoid going to the airports if they can avoid it. And I think there's some numbers out there that I've read that there's 10 million people in this country that can afford $1 million something. And if that's the case, there are going to be a lot of people with 5 or 10 or 20,000 more show up to buy bonanzas. There aren't that many around. So I think you're going to see significant growth. And I think we have to figure out how to be responsible. We don't want to be the transmitter and be seen as cavalier. But you can still do this in a safe way, no different than you can in an RV or boat or a car. So I think we just have to be responsible about how we move around the country. But I'm bullish about what you're going to see.
Are you already seeing numbers that basically are starting to reflect that positivity?
Yeah, I mean, our little Aviation Finance group at AOPA had the best month ever. So June was really, really good too.
They had the best month ever. That's fantastic.
Yeah, we're seeing loan requests coming in, and remember, a lot of people don't use loans for aircraft; they do other forms of financing or personal availability. But we're seeing tremendous growth in interest in buying aircraft. And when I talk to the OEMs, everybody's having a really good year selling brand new airplanes, and therefore used ones are getting tighter supply. I talked to an insurance underwriter this morning about our issues, and they had one of their biggest month in new business coming in over the transom. So, and the FBO in New Richmond, Wisconsin said his fuel business was up 60% this last month.
Wow.
In avgas.
That's exactly what we need. So I mean, that's excellent because I mean, again, it's all a trickle down. So if you're seeing those kind of numbers in people financing aircraft and buying aircraft, especially used aircraft, well, when they buy it, they invest in it. When they invest in it to upgrade it, that helps all these avionics companies. That helps the engine companies and the parts companies and brakes, everything, and the local AMPs and shops and avionics shops. I mean, everybody who touches these aircraft, I've got so many connections in the community. I'm always, rooting for them and hoping that they don't have to lay people off, have a strong backlog, and I really hope that continues to be the case.
It sure seems like it will be. All the OEMs I talk to and then the shops, avionic shops, or lots of people that are connected to AOPA, they're all having a really good year. And some of our bigger sponsors, whether it's Sporties or Spruce, they're having a great year. People selling new headsets and all the alike. So it seems, and again, as long as we do this responsibly and do it safely, we're in for an uptick here. And I don't know why it won't stay that way for quite some time. Again, I feel badly for some of the people involved in the airline business because I think it's going to be challenging for a good long time. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we certainly don't, like the fact that it's at the expense of the airline business at all. I think that you mentioned responsible travel. I mean, we're certainly traveling less now, but having people have the ability to travel, it's doesn't seem to me like that is creating more trouble. I think what it's doing is reducing the fact that you don't have 100+ people that are, having to worry about whether they're catching it during the transportation process itself. And we can eliminate that in general aviation and business aviation, and maybe that'll help spark a boom in that, because I know so many people. We looked at a pilot shortage, and I'm hoping it's coming back.
Well, it was interesting to listen to the airline leaders that talk about they're going to see some furloughs, some layoffs, and some of the people are taking early retirements, and hopefully, some vaccine or some way of getting around it. But I do think there's probably some permanent shifts in what's acceptable and what people are willing to do, and frankly, like tonight, we're all figuring out this video thing a little bit different. In some cases, the international travel won't be quite as necessary for those 2-hour meetings.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, again, thank you so much for everything that you've done, for coming on SocialFlight Live and telling us your story. I really, really do appreciate it. Well,
Jeff, you got to keep up the good work and keeping this community engaged, excited, and positive is what you do. And I thank you for that as well. And I look forward to hopefully seeing you at the Seaplane base next year.
Oh, absolutely. I will absolutely be there. And so everyone, thank you so much for joining us this evening with AOPA President Mark Baker, his story. Feel free to post questions. We'll certainly do our best to get those followed up afterwards with everything. If you don't already subscribe to SocialFlight, be sure to check out socialflight.com and the free SocialFlight mobile apps. All the tens of thousands of events. There are webinars. There's so many things happening. It is all free and a great way to help support general aviation. Find those destinations like the ones that we showed at the beginning of the show as well. And here at SocialFlight Live, we are going to be going on our own adventure. We will be off for the next 2 weeks, and then we will be back on Tuesday, August 25th at 8 p.m. We're going to have T51 Mustang night. See this project behind me? That's our Mustang here in our living room, and we're going to take everyone on a tour and show you all sorts of stuff about what's going on with that, answer lots of questions about that. And then on Tuesday, September 1st, Mike Bush is back here, and we're going to talk lean at peak operations. Many more exciting shows to come. And again, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks, Mark. I really do appreciate your time this evening and helping inspire general aviation, all you do.
Thanks, pal. See you all.
Take care to everyone. Blue skies.